I never thought my life would turn upside down because of a piece of land. But when I got the call from my mom, I couldn't believe what she was saying. My grandpa had left me his ranch, an 800-hectare paradise, tucked away in the countryside, with rolling hills, grazing cows, and a legacy of generations. I grew up hearing stories about it, the smell of fresh hay, the sound of cattle in the early morning, and my grandpa's deep rumbling laugh as he worked the fields. And now it was all mine. The first time I drove up the winding dirt road to the ranch, I felt a surge of pride and nostalgia. The sun was just rising, casting golden streaks across the wide-open pastures. Everything seemed perfect, like a dream frozen in time. I could almost hear my grandpa whispering, "Take care of her." But the reality hit hard when I saw it. The HOA had already moved in. Not gently, not temporarily. They had built villas, winding asphalt roads and manicured lawns right in the middle of my property. Villas on my grandpa's land. I froze. I thought there had to be some mistake. This land had been in our family for decades. How could a homeowners association just invade it? I ran to the edge of one of the newly built properties and saw families moving into homes that should have never existed. Their children were running through fields that had been grazing grounds for my cows. My heart sank as I realized something worse. The HOA refused to acknowledge my ownership. They had their permits, their fancy lawyers, and their community guidelines. But none of that mattered to me. They had no right to touch this land. I tried to speak to them civilly at first. I knocked on doors, explained who I was, and showed my grandfather's deeds. Most of them just smiled politely, nodded, and walked away. One woman even laughed, saying, "Oh, honey, it's just easier if you sell." Easier? Easier? I could feel my blood boil. I wasn't going to sell. This was my heritage. This was where my grandpa had taught me to ride a tractor, to feed the cows, to respect the land. And now it was a playground for strangers. As I stood there, the smell of fresh earth mixed with concrete dust, I knew something had to be done. But what could I do? I wasn't just fighting developers. I was up against a well-funded, organized HOA that thought they could rewrite history with their bulldozers and blueprints. The sun beat down on me as I made a silent vow. I would not let them take this land without a fight. Not quietly, not politely. And then I noticed something that made my jaw drop even further. My cows. My grandpa's cows were wandering into the villa's swimming pools. I could practically hear my grandpa's voice yelling from above. Teach them respect. I knew then this was going to be a battle unlike any other. The next morning I returned to the ranch determined to make my presence known. I couldn't just sit back while my grandpa's legacy was being paved over. I started by inspecting the boundaries, walking the fences, measuring the land, and taking photos to document every inch. The HOA's villas loomed in the distance like shiny intruders. Manicured lawns replacing the wild pastures my family had nurtured for generations. It felt like walking through someone else's dream and realizing it was my nightmare. I decided to confront the HOA officially. I drafted a letter outlining my ownership, complete with deeds and historical records. I delivered it in person to the HOA office, expecting at least a moment of acknowledgement. Instead, the receptionist barely glanced at me and handed my letter to a suited man who introduced himself as their attorney. "We have permits, zoning approvals, and legal rights," he said, his voice dripping with confidence. "You might want to consider selling before this gets complicated." His smirk made my skin crawl. Complicated. This was my grandfather's land. Frustrated but not defeated, I knew I had to get creative. Legal battles take months, maybe years. Meanwhile, my grandpa's cows were still wandering the property, trampling flower beds and grazing wherever they pleased. That's when I remembered the old manure loader we had tucked away in a shed. It was heavy, messy, and loud, but it was mine, and I could use it to send a message. That's how it started. Whenever I saw people getting too comfortable, snapping selfies near the grazing fields, I would roll in, literally with the loader, dumping fresh manure into the areas where they posed. Social media loved it. One woman, Karen's daughter, had taken photos with my cows, completely ignoring the chaos they were creating. I couldn't resist. I photobombed her shots with a manure loader, leaving a trail of mess and laughter in my wake. The neighbors hated me, but honestly, I felt like my grandpa was laughing along with me from wherever he was. But the real fight wasn't just about social media wins. I realized I needed evidence, allies, and a strategy. I started talking to old neighbors, farmers, and anyone who had records or memories of the ranch. Each story, each scrap of evidence, reminded me that this land wasn't just soil and fences. It was a living memory. And if the HOA thought they could erase that, they were sorely mistaken. By the end of the week, the HOA had called the police multiple times, citing harassment and property disputes. I wasn't scared. I was fired up. This wasn't just a battle over land. It was a battle for legacy, for history, for the soul of the ranch. And I wasn't backing down. I stood on a hill overlooking the villas, the cows grazing behind me, and thought, this is only the beginning. The HOA thinks they've won. They've got another thing coming. By the third week, the conflict had reached a fever pitch. The HOA wasn't just ignoring me anymore. They were actively trying to push me off my own land. Surveyors showed up unannounced, staking lines and measuring corners that were clearly marked as mine. Their lawyers sent letters threatening fines and injunctions. It felt like the walls of the ranch were closing in, and every familiar corner of my grandfather's land had been infiltrated by bureaucracy. But I refused to be intimidated. I started patrolling the property daily, not just with cameras, but with the cows as my backup. Somehow, seeing the herd roam freely gave me courage and sometimes amusement. They had no idea they were my secret weapons, but they quickly learned the routine. If people got too close to the fields, a little cow chaos would follow. One morning, I caught a group of new homeowners trying to plant flowers near the barn. My cows wandered over, sniffed, nudged, and trampled everything in sight. It was messy, unpredictable, and perfect. The HOA predictably freaked out. Emails flew back and forth, their tone increasingly aggressive. "This is harassment! You are interfering with lawful property development." I read them aloud to my cows, laughing. Lawful? My grandpa's deed said otherwise. And then came the escalation. I hadn't fully anticipated. Neighbors started taking sides. Some were curious, some were amused, but a few were furious. They called city officials, staged small protests, and even tried to block the ranch entrance. That's when I realized I needed a bigger plan. I couldn't just react, I had to control the narrative. I started filming everything. The cows roaming the villas, the HOA's surveys, and my own little stunts with the manure loader. I posted videos online, documenting the invasion of the ranch. People were shocked. Comments flooded in. "Who does the HOA think they are? That cow photobomb is legendary." Suddenly, public attention was on my side. But the turning point came one afternoon when Keran's daughter returned, expecting another cute cow selfie. This time, I was ready. I drove the manure loader right into the frame, and the video went viral. It wasn't just funny, it was symbolic. The ranch had a voice. My grandpa's legacy wasn't silent. Every post, every share, every comment strengthened my case. Yet despite the small victories, the reality remained. The villas were still there. The HOA wasn't leaving. They were entrenched, bold, and confident in their legal shields. And I realized something terrifying. This fight wasn't just about cows or manure or viral videos. It was about proving that history, family, and heritage could not be bulldozed by greed and bureaucracy. Standing on the porch, watching the sun set over my sprawling land, I knew the next move would be critical. I had anger, I had allies, and I had public attention, but the HOA had money, influence, and lawyers. The real battle was coming, and it was going to get messy. The morning of the showdown arrived like a storm. I could feel it in the air, the tension, the stakes. The knowledge that everything my grandpa had built was on the line. The HOA had sent a team of lawyers and surveyors determined to finalize their villas, and I had my cameras, my cows, and the manure loader at the ready. This wasn't just a fight over land anymore. It had become a battle for justice, heritage, and pride. I drove down the main ranch road, my cows following closely behind, like a furry, unpredictable army. The HOA team looked at me with thinly veiled irritation. "You can't keep doing this," one lawyer barked, waving papers. "This is harassment. You are trespassing on property that is legally owned by our homeowners." I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. Every inch of that land belonged to my family. Every corner, every pasture, every fence post had my grandfather's name etched in deeds, history, and memories. Then the moment of chaos arrived. Keran's daughter and a few others tried taking more. Selfies near the grazing fields, My cows wandered in, curious as ever, nudging kids, sniffing phones and scattering flowers. I rev-ed the manure loader, and the next few minutes were legendary. Not just a stunt, this was a reclaiming of territory. An assertion that the ranch belonged to me, and no HOA could override generations of ownership. The lawyers protested, the homeowners panicked, and cameras captured it all. My online posts exploded with attention. People were calling me a hero, a prankster, a fighter. Whatever it was, the story had gone viral. The HOA finally tried to push harder legally, filing injunctions and threats of fines. But the public attention turned the tide. City officials, previously hesitant to intervene, started asking questions. Historical records were pulled, deeds were verified, and one by one, the HOA's claims crumbled under scrutiny. They hadn't expected a viral movement combined with airtight documentation. And just like that, their confidence dissolved. By sunset, the villas stood, empty and awkward, while I watched my cows graze freely across the pastures. I didn't need to bulldoze anything. They had already lost the fight. My grandpa's ranch was intact. It was messy, it was chaotic, but it was mine. As I stood on the old wooden porch, breathing in the smell of earth and hay, I laughed. Not just because of the manure loader antics or the viral videos, or even Keran's daughter's defeated selfies. I laughed because I had fought for what mattered. I had preserved a legacy, protected a piece of history, and shown that no HOA, or anyone, could erase the past with a few permits and a bulldozer. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, I knew one thing for sure. This ranch, my grandpa's 800 hectares of stubborn, beautiful land, would never be taken from me again. Enjoying this wild story of my grandpa's ranch and the HOA chaos? Hit that subscribe button to follow along for more real-life adventures and land battles. If this story made you laugh, gasp, or shake your head, give it a like, and drop a comment below telling me what you would do if someone tried to take over your family's land.